Today is Easter, the day when we celebrate that Jesus died and God made him alive again. This is a tomb, a special place for the dead. When Jesus' friends took his body from the cross, they put it here. And they rolled a huge stone in front of it. Mary Magdalene loved Jesus so much. And early Sunday morning, her and her friends went back to the tomb. The tomb was open. Jesus was gone. Where is he? They cried. Then the angel said, "Do not be afraid. Be joyful. Jesus is alive. Go and tell his disciples that Jesus is risen from the dead." But Mary Magdalene did not leave. She stood crying. And then someone said, "Who are you looking for?" And then he said her name, Mary. She knew the sound of his voice. It was Jesus. Jesus is alive. Mary Magdalene could not help but be so happy that she went to tell his friends. "I have seen the Lord. Jesus is risen. The Lord is risen indeed." Will you pray with me? Gracious God, thank you for your Son Jesus as we celebrate that Jesus is alive. He is risen. Amen.
God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city. It shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in an uproar. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge.
God is our refuge and strength.
Thank you. Good morning. There are many versions of the Easter story. One Michelle was sharing with the kids, y'all, today was from John, and I've noticed y'all paid a whole lot more attention to that than you ever did me. Today, we are looking at another gospel story. It is found in the Gospel of Mark. This is an interesting story because there's several versions of Mark's gospel. The original text is what I like the most because it kind of leaves us hanging a little bit, and it kind of puts it in our face, and that's what I kind of like is for say, hey, what are you going to do about this? Or, in other words, it says, you know, you're not going to share this message, so why should I even bother to tell you about it? So it kind of puts a little pressure on us to say, yeah, you know, in our rebellious nature, say, yeah, I bet I do. And so Mark's gospel, the original text on the resurrection, is what I want to share with you this morning. So listen to these words from Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome, brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they said to one another, who's going to roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? And when they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered, they saw a young man, dressed in white, sitting on the right side. They were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He's not here. Look, there's the place they laid him. But go and tell the disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And so they went out and they fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Last week was Palm Sunday. It was the day that Jesus entered the city of Jerusalem. It was for the Passover, and so really, in short, the people welcomed Jesus because they thought he was the chosen one. He thought he was the one who was going to fix all their problems. They had issues with the leadership of Israel that had become corrupt. They also wanted him to lead the military campaign that would just kind of destroy the Roman Empire and give them power and strength like they had back in the day when David was around. And they just believed Jesus was going to come in and he was just going to fix all their problems. But this really wasn't what Jesus came to do, because he didn't see that Rome was the problem. And this is what's important to the story, because freedom has really nothing to do with who is in charge of where we live. Freedom is simply allowing God to determine how we choose to live in spite of who's in charge. So with the words and the actions throughout his entire life, Jesus showed people who God truly was, who he was. And so now he enters this city on a donkey to emphasize the very nature of God. The people wanted a war horse. But what they got instead was a humble donkey of peace. And so little did all these people realize that Jesus was offering them a choice. Will you be my disciple and follow the way of peace, or will you be my executioner? Because there's no middle ground. Jesus put these people in a situation where they had to say yes or they had to say no. There's no in between. And maybe this really was the agony that Jesus experienced. It wasn't the agony simply of approaching death, but having to wait for his very own people to decide whether they're going to follow him or execute him. God became human not only to walk and act in the world among us so that we can understand who God is in this world, but also to wait for our response to follow or reject, to accept or to deny, to be all in or be all out, to be hot or to be cold. There is never anything in between when it comes to this. And so the people cheered when Jesus entered the city on a donkey. And just a few days later, they chose to be his executioner. And his closest friends, his disciples, who swore up and down that they would never leave his side in his time of need, that they would never deny him, ran and fled for their own lives, leaving Jesus to die in front of his mother. His mother. Now stop just for a minute. Take in that scene. And put yourself in God's position. What would you do if you were God, seeing all this thing play out before you? I have given you a life for 30 years who has done nothing but love you and accept you. And this is how it ends. What would you do? Act in anger? Revenge? Harsh punishment? Throw your hands up, just abandon the planet altogether? How about a flood? Make it flood. Start all over again. Worked pretty well last time. Not. But not this mysterious God. You see, when the women went to the tomb where Jesus was laid, there was a young man who greeted them with good news that Jesus had been raised from the dead. And he was to meet everyone in Galilee. And I imagine the women saying, why is Jesus going to meet us in Galilee? Is he going to read us the right act? Is he going to be angry with us and lash out at us, punish us? Is he going to call us a bunch of selfish cowards? Even good news is hard to believe sometimes. Instead, he gave them a second chance. But even the second chance, the story concludes this way. And so the women went out, and they fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. It's kind of a shocking ending. They said nothing because they were afraid. Mark's gospel was written 30 years after the death of Jesus. That's important, because that first generation of believers who knew, heard, who saw, experienced firsthand Jesus, who were also the storytellers of the stories of Jesus to the churches, that generation was beginning to die. Who was going to continue this story? And so Mark ends this gospel this way for the next generation to determine what it is they're going to do. What are you going to do? Because this ending leaves them with a challenge. Generation, what will you do? Will you be a disciple of Jesus and will you tell the story? Will you set aside your fear and live out in your message of the world? Or will you be his executioner? Will you continue to live in fear for your life and take things safe? Will you be silent and allow his love and his grace to go unnoticed in a world that is of people who are needing what the Creator can offer them? Resurrection is not only the good news, but it's also quite challenging for us to determine what in the world are we going to do with this message of good news. Resurrection is powerful. Even in the book of Romans, it was Paul who said these words, if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. Now I'm going to be honest with you. I never understood what it meant to be saved. Never understood that word, you know? It's one of those church words we use all the time. I don't get it. It's such a vague term. It can mean a number of things, right? And it's probably the most used and abused words in all of Christianity. What does it mean to be saved? That gets thrown at us almost like a rock sometimes. So I really don't understand what it means to be saved, but what I do know is what resurrection does mean to me. Because resurrection is more than just a body that raised itself from the dead in some tomb somewhere in Jerusalem. It's far more powerful than that. Resurrection to me is new life. It's new opportunities over and over and over again. It's second chances 3 or 4 or 6 times over. Resurrection to me means that in spite of my foolish behavior that constantly persecutes Jesus with the things that I say and the things that I do out for the public to see, God still chooses me. Resurrection means to me that in spite of my inability to be perfect or to be blameless or without blemish, I still belong to God. Resurrection to me means that even though my fears sometimes determine my decisions and I abandoned Christ in the times that He needs me the most, that I am still a part of God's chosen people who have been set aside by God to do great things for God. To me, resurrection is really summed up in 1 Peter when Peter said these: once we were not a people, but now we are God's people. Once we were without mercy, but now we have received mercy. That's huge. Because we live in a world that says this: if you prove yourself, I will love you. As long as you continue to scratch my back, I will scratch your back. So long as you appear to be financially and socially powerful, I will give myself to you. But God says through this language of resurrection that though you may leave me time and time and time again, I will never leave you orphaned, period. Because I claimed you, I named you, I believe in you, I have empowered you to be my people. And there is no need to live your life out in fear. I have got your death covered. In fact, I'll offer a place that's even better than you can imagine in this place. So set aside your hesitation, your reluctance, your skepticism, and live and share and be the good news in the world. Because it is the best way to live the life that I have given you. To me, this is what resurrection means. It is a message that cannot be silenced. It should be the message that is defined by the church. It is what we should be celebrating every single time we gather around this table. We say at this table, oh my gosh, look what I have done to you, my God. All you wanted to do was love me. And we hear these words that say to us, my love cannot be removed. So you might as well just embrace it. Reflect on our psalmist.